This might be maybe the most important shiur that I ever gave. I don't know, possibly. Let's see. It might be the most consequential. I found something a few weeks ago that just really blew me away, and I've been really excited to share it. But I'm going to leave that to the end. We'll save the best for last. So don't fall asleep. Now, really, this is something like a sequel to a class that we gave actually 3 years ago. Some of you were there, some of you heard it. So January 2021, it was the middle of the pandemic, and we were in a lockdown, and there was a request to do some classes online. And then people wanted recordings. I was sharing them through like a Google Drive, and it was too annoying. So eventually I just put it on YouTube. So then I started the YouTube a few months later. And at that time, in January 2021, when I first gave this class, I didn't have the YouTube channel. So I ended up posting that class in I think September maybe of 2021, and it was called Are We in the End of Days? But it was originally from January, from about 3 years ago. So I really wanted to follow up on that and update it a little bit in light of everything that's happened in the world since then, to go back and look at that prophecy, Are We in the End of Days, and add to it. Because when I actually went back to look at it, it was pretty amazing that what we suggested 3 years ago has pretty much come true quite exactly year by year. So I want to go back to that, review it, and then add to it, okay? Considering where we are today, and then finish with this new discovery, which I think is really amazing. So, going back to that class from 3 years ago, Are We in the End of Days? We focused there on a couple of prophecies, one of which was a very famous prophecy that appears in a few places in the Talmud and the Midrash about the final 7 years before Mashiach comes. We've probably all heard this prophecy before. So I'm going to go through it again. And we made a suggestion then that we are within this 7-year time period before Mashiach comes. So I'm quoting from Masechet Sanhedrin, and this is how it starts. Tanu Rabbanan, our sages taught, Shavua sheben David ba, in the week of years before Mashiach ben David comes, this is what's going to happen. So Shana Rishona, in the first year, Mitkayem Mikra Zed, so the verse in Amos, one of the prophets, it will be fulfilled. The verse is that God will make it rain on one city, imtarti al irachat, that I will make it rain in one place and not make it rain in another place, that there's going to be like droughts in some places and flooding in other places and like severe weather, strange weather around the world. Okay, so that we've seen. That's not necessarily specific to any one year. We get that all the time in our day and age. So that doesn't tell us much yet. But that's what it said. In the first year, we're going to see some strange weather phenomena. And then it says, Shniya, in the second year, chitzei ra'av mishtalchim. The arrows of famine, ra'av, will be sent forth. Okay? And then shlishit, and this is the big one, in the third year, there will be a ra'av gadol. There's going to be a great famine around the world. Umetim anashim, and many people will die. Vennashim, so men and women. Anashim vennashim, men and women. Vetaf, and children. Chasidim, ve'anshei ma'aseh, and great people and pious people. U'torah mishtakachat milomdea, and the Torah will be forgotten, or there will be less Torah in this third year. And so what we said back then, in 2021, we made the suggestion that this is talking about the pandemic that we were in at the time. Because, although here it says ra'av, it says a famine, there are other sources that we quoted then, and you can go back to that recording and listen to it. There are other sources that we quoted then that say not a famine necessarily, but actually a plague, that there's going to be a disease that will engulf the entire world. So combining these two ideas together, it's not necessarily a famine here, but we could read this also as a plague. And that's really what we saw, because it says in the second year, the arrows of famine will be sent for, or the arrows of this plague will be launched, but it won't be visible in the world yet. And then in the third year, there's going to be like a full-blown global catastrophe in which many people will die, even religious people, Torah will be reduced, and so on. So we made the suggestion back then, 3 years ago, that that's what we saw. Because in that year, in 2020, the pandemic really started in 2019. The arrows were sent forth before. But we really only experienced it in 2020 when the lockdowns happened and many people were dying and many religious people and Jewish communities were hit particularly hard and there was many rabbis that died, including some really big rabbis and Gedolim and Hasidim. And it says here also the tough, even children. The truth is that COVID didn't really harm children, thank God. But the virus didn't harm children so much, but the measures, the protective measures, the so-called protective measures that were introduced were actually in some ways much more harmful, especially to children. All the lockdowns and the lack of school and the lack of socializing. And if you remember, the parks were closed and like the park next to my house was cordoned off from like March to August. Remember that first long lockdown that kids couldn't even play in the park, and it was really distressing. And I know of several young people that even attempted suicide, like people in the Jewish community. And thank God those attempts weren't successful, but there were many others that were unfortunately successful. So sometimes, in some cases, in many ways, the cure was worse than the disease. And many people suffered during this time. And of course, schools were closed, yeshivas were closed, synagogues were closed. So when this prophecy says that Torah will be forgotten, that Torah study will be lessened, that certainly happened with all of the places, Torah institutions being closed. So that was a suggestion that we made back then. And we had said that, based on the chronology here, that the first year would correspond to 2018, and then or on the Jewish calendar, 5778. So they're going to be a little bit off, right? Because the Jewish calendar starts in the fall, and then the secular calendar in January. So they're going to be off by a few months, but overall. And then the second year would be like 2019 and 5779. And then the third year, which is where the prophecy says that there would be a lot of death, global suffering, that would be 2020, which is 5780. And then it continues and says that Berevi'it, in the fourth year, there would be Sova ve'eina Sova, that in some places there will be a recovery from this catastrophe, but in some places there wouldn't be. So it's usually translated as there will be a partial recovery. Things will start to get better in the fourth year. So I think you can interpret that in a couple of ways. I mean, when we originally talked about this, was in the beginning of 2021, and things were just maybe starting to improve. And they did over the course of the year get better. And I think also when it says Sova ve'einu Sova, that for some people there will be recovery, and for some people there won't be. I think that was kind of the theme of 2021, was who's vaccinated and who's not, and who gets to go back to their normal life and who doesn't, and who's allowed to go back and go to restaurants and schools and participate in society, and who doesn't. So for some people, 2021 was the start of a recovery, and for other people, they were still in lockdown. And probably many lost their jobs and their livelihoods, for whatever it was. So that's what it says about the fourth year, which would have been 2021, 5781. And then it says, Bechamishit, in the fifth year, finally there will be Sova Gadol, ve'ochlin ve'shotin u'smechim ve'torah chozeret lelomdea. So in the fifth year, everything will kind of go back to normal. People will be happy again, and all the places, all the institutions will be reopened, and everybody's learning Torah again, and so on. So that would have been 2022, which is what happened, because around the world, all the measures were being repealed. So even here, where we had in Canada some of the most draconian measures, I think here it was in October of 2022 that everything was finally lifted. Yeah? I think that's right. So even here, we had it longer than in most places, but by the fall of 2022, it was basically over. And so that would correspond to here, the fifth year. And then this is where we get to what's going on now, which we couldn't have known back then, which is Beshishit Kolot. In the sixth year, there will be sounds. Sounds of what? Let's see. Beshvi'it, and then in the seventh year, Milchamot. Will be great wars. So usually the way it's interpreted is in the sixth year there will be sounds of war, rumors of war, the beginnings of war. And then in the seventh, you will have wars. So if you follow the chronology, the fifth year would have been, if you do the math, was 2022. And then the sixth year would have been 2023. And then the seventh year, which would be now 2024/5784. So from the Jewish calendar, which started at the end of September 5784, that would correspond to Milchamot. And what we witnessed, unfortunately, tragically, is right at the beginning of the Jewish year, at the beginning of 5784, which would correspond to this 7th year, we know what happened. So now we're at war since then, all this time. And so it seems like this 7-year cycle matches up pretty neatly with what we've experienced over the past 6 years and a couple months. And when it talks about in the 6th year there would be sounds of war, if you think about the theme at the start of this year, like going back to 5783, what dominated Jewish news was the divide in Israel, this like civil war in Israel and people hating on each other and crazy fighting and protesting and soldiers refusing to report to duty. And really, if you were listening to the analysts, both religious and secular, in 5783, in 2023, they were both saying that this is a very dangerous time for Israel and the Jewish people because our enemies see that we're weak. Soldiers are saying they're not going to report to duty. The government is busy dealing with silly, political maneuvers and all this protesting and whatever. And our enemies are going to take advantage of it. So secular analysts were saying war is coming, and religious people were saying war is coming because we know God hates more than anything else. God hates sinat chinam, when the Jewish people are hating on each other and are being divisive and fighting, and that usually historically leads to some catastrophe, right? When the Jewish people lose their way and start infighting, a catastrophe is inevitable. So in 2023, the sounds of war were coming, and a lot of people here were talking. I was saying that it's basically inevitable that a war is coming. So I think when it says in the 6th year there would be everything coming up to leading to war, and then in the 7th year war, I think we've witnessed that pretty accurately in the past 2 years, 5783 and the start of 5784. So that was like the recap of that prophecy, the 7-year cycle that we discussed 3 years ago. And now when we look back at it, what we had suggested then, looking forward, has actually happened, which is pretty amazing. And the most important part to this prophecy is how it ends. It says, B'shvit milchamot, so in the 7th year there will be wars, and b'motzei shvi'it, and at the end of the 7th year, meaning at the start of the 8th year, ben David ba. That's when Mashiach comes. Okay? So after a year of this, there's going to be this year of war, and at the end, at the beginning of the 8th year, Mashiach will come. So that's pretty amazing. Now, going back to this idea of the 6th year, of things that are leading up to the 7th year, and the other thing that dominated news in the 6th year, in 5783, was... The other thing was Ukraine. Everybody was talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. Now the attention has shifted to Israel. But everybody was talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. And we talked about this back then as well, a couple of years ago, about the Third Rome. And when the Russia-Ukraine war started, we talked about this. Is this the start of what's called Gog uMagog, the final end of days war? And now what's the connection between Russia-Ukraine and Israel, Hamas, Gaza? Is there a connection there?
Russia, Iran,
Good. So one of the best analyses I've seen about why Hamas suddenly launched this war, what was the reason for Hamas to start this war? Why would they do it? Everything seemed to be going well for them. The Israeli government... So the Israeli government was under the impression that Hamas wouldn't risk a war because they're sitting really happy and rich and fat. Netanyahu's been giving them suitcases of cash. Gaza was getting tens of thousands of work permits. Everything was going well. The people seemed to be living well. And the Israeli government was under the impression that Hamas wouldn't launch a war. And then they launched this catastrophic thing. And why would they do that? They've lost at least 10,000, maybe 15,000 fighters. They're depleting all of their weapons. Their leaders are getting killed. All their commanders are getting crushed. Why would they do it?
It's because of the Abraham Accords. Because they saw that Israel was getting close to sign with Saudi Arabia and Bahrain.
Exactly. Right. So at the time, if you're in September, just a few months ago, there was all this talk about Israel and Saudi Arabia signing a peace deal. And that peace deal was pretty comprehensive and included also a lot more trade between the two. Even there were discussions of a rail network that would connect from Saudi Arabia through Israel to Europe, and most significantly, pipelines, because Saudi Arabia is trying to sell its oil to Europe. And Israel now has gas and wants to make pipelines directly to you. So there was an idea, there was a discussion to create a pipeline network of oil and gas going from Saudi Arabia through Israel to Europe. And now what's the connection to Russia? Because that's their main source of income, is oil and gas to Europe. So now if you're going to have this new oil and gas access coming from the Middle East to Europe, that undercuts Russia. And that's what Europe wants. The Europeans don't know what they're so dependent on Russian oil and gas, and they're trying to wean off of it, and they're looking for other sources. So part of this Israel-Saudi deal would have resulted in European countries getting more oil and gas. And for Russia, that would cut off a major source of their funding. So Russia wanted this deal killed. The Palestinians, of course, wanted this deal killed. But you see, for Russia, this war was like a triple win. Because one is they protect their oil and gas revenue. Two, all the attention is now off of Russia. Everybody's talking about Israel, Hamas. Everybody's protesting on behalf of the Palestinians now, whereas a year ago, everybody was protesting in support of the Ukrainians. All the discussion was about Ukraine. Now, forget Ukraine. And now Zelensky and the Ukrainian leadership are crying and complaining, like nobody cares about us anymore. Everybody forgot about us, right? He's openly saying this, that the whole Israel-Gaza conflict has taken all the attention away from Ukraine. So Russia wins from that. And not only that, but now Ukraine's getting less funding, less money. You know, the U.S. has been sending tons of money to Ukraine, but since the war in Israel started, they can't get a package through to send. I don't know if you've been following what's happening in Congress, but they can't get a package through to get money to Ukraine. And other people who were sending donations to Ukraine are now sending all their donations to Gaza. So Ukraine's now losing money. Russia gets off the hook because nobody's talking about Russia, and they can do whatever they want now. And Russia gets to protect its revenues. So one of the best analyses I've seen is that Russia was behind this and wanted Hamas to launch this attack because it's a triple win for them. And within days of the attack, Russia hosted a Hamas delegation in Moscow and then hosted them again a few weeks later. And Russia does not consider Hamas a terrorist organization. Here in Canada, Hamas is designated a terrorist organization. In the US, Hamas is designated a terrorist organization, and in other Western countries. But Russia does not consider them a terrorist organization. And one of Hamas's leaders actually said openly to the media that Russia is Hamas's best friend. That's what he said. Abu Marzouk said that Russia is Hamas's best friend. So many would say that it was the Russians that were behind this attack. There was even an Israeli minister that had a long, tirade, a rant against Russia, saying, we're going to get you back for this. We know it was you. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was going around that there was an Israeli minister that was really going hard on Russia, saying, we know that it was you that did this. And that really fits into what we were saying again a couple of years ago about the identity of the third Rome. Who is this third? There's this other prophecy about there being a third Rome, and when the third Rome falls, Mashiach will come. And we made the case then that Russia probably fits that position best, that identity. Who is the modern day third Rome? We argued then that Russia plays that role really well. And also, coincidentally, although we don't believe in coincidences, the war started on October 7th. The massacre took place on October 7th, and that's actually Vladimir Putin's birthday. I don't know if you guys know this, so it's almost like Hamas gave Putin a birthday present, but it was on his birthday that this war started. So if you believe in coincidences or not, I don't know, but that's a strange coincidence that all that happened. So this war was really, the biggest winner from this war has been Russia. So that's the connection also to what's going on in Russia-Ukraine and the bridge between the 6th year, the 7th year, and what's happening now. And there's a whole other set of prophecies that we talked about before. The war started, October 7th was also Shmini Atzeret. It was basically the end of Sukot, right? And we have a long tradition that Sukot is the start of Gog Magog, which is why on Sukot, if you look at the Haftarot that we read on the holiday, they're all about Gog Magog. We read from Zechariah, we read from Ezekiel, we read the whole Yechezkel, Gog Magog section. So Sukot always had an association with Gog Magog. Even the fact that in ancient times in the temple, they would bring 70 bulls. Over the course of Sukkot, they would sacrifice 70 bulls, one for each of the 70 root nations. And Gog Magog is supposed to represent a global conflict that involves all 70 nations. And the gematria even of Gog Magog, the numerical value of Gog Magog is 70. To indicate, again, that it's like a global conflict involving all 70 root nations, 70 root peoples of the world. And so it all ties into Sukot. And so that the war started on Sukot is, again, another fulfillment of prophecy of an ancient tradition that the final war would start on Sukot. And how long will it last? So the Mishnah in Aduyot says like this. Chamisha dvarim shel 12 chodesh. There are 5 things that last a year, or that last 12 months specifically. The first thing is Mishpat Dor HaMabul, that the flood, the generation of the flood lasted 1 year. Right? The Torah says this clearly. The flood, the great flood in the time of Noah, lasted 1 year. And then Mishpat Iyov, the judgment of Job. You know the book of Job, Iyov? It's a really important book, one of the most deeply philosophical books of the Tanakh. Everybody should read it. And we know that Job, Iyov, he suffered. He was punished. God gave Satan permission. The Satan came and, wanted to make him pay. And there's reasons why he did that. And God gave Satan permission to torture Job. And that suffering lasted 1 year. So the suffering of Job lasted 12 chodesh, 12 months, 1 year. Mishpat HaMitzrim. So in Egypt, the 10 plagues lasted a year. From the time that Moses came to Egypt and the plague started, the 10 plagues and the stuff a little bit before and after that took place over the course of 1 year. So the 10 plagues and the suffering of the Egyptians lasted 1 year. And then it says, Mishpat Gog Magog La'atid Lavo. And the war of Gog Magog in the future, in the end of days, the war of Gog Magog will last 1 year or 12 months. And then it also adds Mishpat Rashaim Begehenom, which is what you were saying, that the wicked suffer in Gehenom for 1 year. That's what it says. So 5 things that last 1 year. The flood lasted 1 year. The Iyov suffering lasted 1 year. The suffering of the Egyptians lasted 1 year. Gog Magog, which will be like a global suffering, will last 1 year. And also the wicked who pass away, suffer in Gehenom, go through hell for 1 year. And to purify their souls, because, Judaism doesn't have a notion like in other religions, which shall not be named, that have like eternal hell because you failed to believe in something. Why would an all-powerful, all-loving God who cares about you, who made you and loved you, condemn you to suffer forever in an eternal damnation in hell? It makes no sense. So Judaism doesn't have such a notion of eternal damnation. A person who's wicked will go to Gehenom for 1 year, up to 1 year, to be purified of their sins. That's all. So that's the Mishnah. So we do expect, generally speaking, the consensus of the Mishnah is that Gog Magog lasts 1 year, or specifically really 12 months, which is interesting because if it's this year we have 13 months. We have a leap year. So what does that mean? Let's see. But we have this 1 year Gog Magog, perhaps 12 months, but this year's 13 months, so it would probably end in Elul maybe like one month short. And hopefully we're within that year because we all want Mashiach to come already. Now, what's going to happen over this time? So another prophecy that we actually explored a couple of months ago when the war started from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. The Midrash says like this. עוד היה רבי ישמעאל אומר, 3 מלחמות של מהומה עתידין בני ישמעאל לעשות בארץ באחרית הימים. 3 wars של מהומה, 3 great wars עתידין בני ישמעאל that the Ishmaelites will do, לעשות בארץ, will do in the world באחרית הימים. In the end of days, the Ishmaelites, the Arab peoples will cause 3 wars. Okay, how do we know? There's a pasuk that says, in Isaiah and Yeshayahu, Ki mipnei charavot nadadu, because people are fleeing from swords, and the prophecy says, Ein charavot ela milchamot. This means that there will be wars, and charavot is plural, so it's implying multiple wars. Where will these wars be? Achat baya'ar, one in the forest, in the wilderness. Achat bayam, and echad bekrach gadol. So one in the sea and one in a big city. So we suggested a couple of months ago that the way that Hamas launched their attack, it was very similar to what this prophecy is saying, that there was a 3-pronged attack. They came from the sea and landed at the Zikim beach, and they came into the cities, into the kibbutzim, into Sderot, and they attacked in the wilderness at the nature party, at the Nova festival, at the nature party, which was probably the worst of the attacks. So Hamas launched a 3-part war, and this prophecy is saying in the end of days, the Ishmaelim will launch a three-part war, one in the wilderness, one in the cities, and one from the sea. So maybe that could be it. And it's interesting that it's the pasuk that it uses is mipnei charavot. The source for this is the verse in Isaiah about charavot, about swords. And if you know how the Israeli government has called the current war, what's the name of this war? Yeah, Charavot Barzel, right? They called it the iron swords, which is interesting. Because the names of Israel's operations are generated randomly, automatically by a machine. Like the next operation, there's a next name that the computer spits out. And now the government's actually thinking how to rename this war because this operation, Charavot Barzel, iron swords, doesn't really cut it. So it's interesting that it uses dafka, the word charavot, because that's actually the verse that the prophecy is using as proof, based on the word charavot. And then, in the aftermath of the attack, what the government found was that a lot of the weapons that Hamas was using came from North Korea.
All Russia too.
Through Russia. Yeah, there were rumors that Russia supplied Hamas too, which fits in with what we were saying earlier.
All their
RPGs.
and Kalashnikov, whatever.
Yeah, the Kalashnikovs and everything. That's the terrorist weapon of choice. It's all Russian stuff. But they also had a whole bunch of North Korean weapons. And we know that North Korea also is supportive of Hamas and part of this, what's been called this new axis of evil. And North Korea is supported by China. And they're all friends in this. There's Russia, China, Iran. We mentioned before that Iran is the only nation outside of the former Soviet Union that has a military pact with Russia. And so you have China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. They're all part of this together. And Hamas is their proxy in all of this. And North Korea is actually, many people don't realize this, but North Korea is considered by some to be the largest criminal entity in the world because they're involved in crime everywhere, all over the world. They're the main producers of counterfeit money, American dollars. They are in human trafficking. They are one of the biggest drug dealers in the world because they don't really have much income, North Korea. It's completely closed off. And their main source of income is actually crime, world international crime. So they are a criminal entity, North Korea is, and of course they support Hamas. And that ties into another prophecy from the Zohar, which says, Uzminin b'nei Ishmael. So again, the Zohar begins by saying the same thing that we just read from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that the b'nei Ishmael will, le'at'ara kravin tkifin be'alma. They're going to launch big wars in the world. Uleitkansha b'nei Edom alayu. And the Edomites, the Western world, the Christian world, the world of Edom, will have to fight them. And again, it's saying what we read earlier, that they're going to have a war that's chad al yama, one in the oceans, one in the seas, vechad al yabeshta, and one on land, vechad samuch leYerushalayim. So there's going to be one war close to Jerusalem, one war on land, one war in the sea. But the Zohar promises, ve'ara kadisha lo itmasar levnei Edom, that the Edomites will even come to Israel and fight the Ishmaelites, but they're not going to conquer Israel at this time. But they will participate in this war against the Ishmaelites. The Edomites from the west will come. If you read the news yesterday, did anybody see what the U.S. announced? You know how the Yemenites, the Houthis, are shooting missiles and drones and blocking Red Sea traffic. A whole bunch of shipping companies have stopped going through the Red Sea. So yesterday, the United States announced that there's an international coalition now to patrol the waters. So it's heating up in the region, and they have at least 2 battleships / aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea. So the United States has made a naval bubble. They call it a naval bubble around Israel to protect Israel. They're shooting down these Yemenite Houthi missiles and drones. So that really fits into what's going on over here. And then this is the interesting part, that the Zohar continues and says, Ba'u zimna, at that time, itaer am achad, that a certain nation, misayafe alma, from the end of the earth, somewhere from far away, that's not even related to this region, but some nation, misayafe alma, from somewhere far away, from the edge of the world, al-Romi, against this, the Edomites, ve'igach ba krava tlat yalchin, and it'll start a 3-month war. That's what it says. So some nation from the edge of the world will be involved in this conflict. So some might say that that's referring to North Korea or maybe China, somewhere from the far east, from the edge of the world. Veitkanshun taman amamya, and many nations will have to gather against it. Adit kanshun kol bnei Edom Allah, until all the Edomites will have to come against it. Mikol sayafe alma, from all over the world. And then God will be aroused against them. And it gives a verse to prove it. And then it just ends by saying at the end of this war, V'yishetzei livnei Ishmael mina, finally God will subdue the Ishmaelite warriors from the region, and they're not going to be there anymore. God willing, soon. So there's this war. The Ishmaelites are going to launch a 3-pronged war. They're going to be fighting at sea, on land, near Jerusalem. A nation from the edge of the world is going to come to assist them. The Edomites are going to have to fight them. There's going to be this war that's going to last 3 months. But ultimately, the Ishmaelite terrorists will be subdued and will be removed from Israel. That's what it's saying. And you can interpret this, I guess, in various different ways. Okay, now this is the part that I really want. That was the setup. Different prophecies about what Gog and Magog looks like, what the war at the end of days looks like, how long it's supposed to last. So a total of a year or 12 months. There's going to be a 3-month war between some other entities, global powers. So that's like the setup. That's to get a description to understand what the war is supposed to look like, and if that fits with what we are living through today, and it looks like we are. But this is the part I really wanted to get to. We know that this is probably one of the oldest prophecies and oldest traditions that we have about Mashiach. It comes from Bilam in Bamidbar, in Parashat Balak, that Bilam, this Gentile prophet, came to curse Israel and couldn't curse them. Remember the story? That the king Balak hired him to curse Israel, and he tried to curse them, and instead of cursing them, he blessed them. And over there, he gives a prophecy that actually says, I will tell you what will happen be'acharit hayamim, in the end of days. It's one of the few places that the Torah uses the expression end of days, acharit hayamim. The first time is in next week's Parsha, when Yaakov comes he wants to tell his sons, I will tell you what will happen be'acharit hayamim. And this is one of the other places where Bilam says, I'm looking far into the future, and I will tell you what will happen at the end of days. And he says like this, Ar'enu velo ata, I see it, but it's not now. Ashurenu velo karov, like it's not anytime soon. This is going to be far in the future. What's going to happen? At the beginning in the end of days, before Mashiach comes, there will be drach kochav mi Yaakov, that a star will emerge from Jacob. The star of this, like the famous Star of Jacob prophecy, that a star will appear. Now, is that metaphorical? Does that mean that Mashiach is the star, or does that mean that, like literally, a star will appear? Suddenly, there will be a star in the night sky. So traditionally, it was interpreted as there will be a star in the night sky to herald the coming of the Messiah. And of course, Christians adopted this with the whole nativity scene, the Star of Bethlehem, that whatever. But the idea is that this is a very old, ancient prophecy that even 2,000 years ago, this is something that Jews expected. The same is true with Bar Kochva. Remember Bar Kochva, Shimon Bar Kochva, the Bar Kochva revolt. They called him Bar Kochva, the son of the star. His real name was Bar Kozba. Yeah, then they called him Bar Koziva, the son of a lie. But originally it was Bar Kozba, and they call him Bar Kochba. They said he is the star. He is the star of Jacob. So there was always this, even in ancient times, an association of Mashiach, or a potential Messiah, with the star of Jacob. And the prophecy, Bilam's prophecy continues to say, Kam shevet mi Yisrael, that a staff will arise from Israel, umachatz pa'atei Moav, and he will crush whatever is pa'atei Moav, however you want to translate that. Moav is what is today Jordan, which is, of course, the original Palestine. That's what the British mandate Palestine. They carved out Jordan for the Arabs, with the assumption that the west of the Jordan would be for the Jews, and east of the Jordan would be for the Arabs. But then that became Jordan, and then the Arabs wanted everything else too, of course. So, and then at some point, people forget this, that there's no such thing as a Jordanian. That was invented by the British, which was carved out of mandate Palestine. That literally is Palestine. When people ask, where is the Palestinian state? That was literally carved out of mandate Palestine. Jordan is the Palestinian state, and there's no actual difference ethnically between Jordanians and Palestinians. A large percentage of the Jordanian population identifies as Palestinian anyways. If you remember, Yasser Arafat and the PLO actually launched a coup and tried to take over Jordan, because to them, Jordan is Palestine. And when Jordan annexed what is the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria, nobody said anything, right? Jordan had the whole West Bank until 1967.
And that's being generous, because it's 79% of our mandate, right?
Right. So until 1967, Jordan had it, and they didn't bother creating a Palestinian state because they know that there was no such thing. Jordan is the Palestinian state, and they just annexed it. They fully annexed the West Bank until Israel liberated it in 1967. So there already is a Palestinian state, and it's called Jordan. And the flag of Jordan is basically the same as the flag of the Palestinians because they're the same people. If you want to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, it's really simple. Just rename Jordan to Palestine, and you're done. Because it literally is the Arab-Palestinian state that the British gave them. So that's all we're talking about. But here it says that Kam shevet miYisrael u'machatz pa'atei Moav, and he will crush the leadership of Moab, whatever that is. Okay. And v'karkar kol bnei Shet. And then it talks about what's going to happen with, again, it mentions Edom. And it even mentions Amalek here, that Bilam said, Vayaret Amalek. He saw Amalek, which is like the historic spiritual enemy of Israel. And he says, Reshit Goim Amalek, V'acharito Adei Oved. And Bilam foresaw the destruction of Amalek. So he's looking far into the future when the oppressor of Israel will be destroyed. Now the Zohar is what's interesting here. The Zohar elaborates on this very famous prophecy. We discussed it briefly before. The Zohar elaborates on what is the star of Jacob? What is that star gonna look like? And it says like this, Tanan, it was taught, Zemin kut shabrichu lemivnei Yerushalayim. So God will bring it about that Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Great, that's happened pretty much. We don't have the temple, but other than that, Jerusalem has been rebuilt. There's hundreds of thousands of Jews living there. It's a full, large city. And thank God we have Jerusalem today. So this prophecy has already come true, this part, that Jerusalem will be rebuilt. And after that happens, what will happen? And then God will make in the sky a new star will appear. It's going to glow with 70 pillars. There will be all these like 70 light sparks flashing from it, whatever that means. In the middle of the sky. Okay, rakia, we know, is like, it's translated as the firmament, although there's nothing firm about it. It's really just outer space. Right? The rakia is space. The Torah says that the star and the moon, the sun and the moon and the stars are in the rakia. So in the middle of the sky, there will be this new star. And it'll last for 70 days. So there will be a star that will appear in the sky. It'll glow for 70 days. Uveyom hashtita. When is this going to happen? On the 6th day, Uveyom hashtita, 6th day means on a Friday. Itchaze bekaf he yomin leyar hashtita, on the 25th day of the 6th month, which is, what's the 6th month of the year? Elul, right? Elul is the 6th month of the year. Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah is in the 7th month. So on the 25th of Elul, on the Friday, Veitkanish beyom hashviyah, and then it's going to be the star will appear on a Friday, the 25th of Elul, and then what it says it'll be gathered on the 7th day on Shabbat. I'm not sure what that means, that it'll be gathered on the 7th day, and then it'll last for 70 days. Lesof ayin yomin, yoma kadma, in the first day, itchaze bekarta chada de Roma, it'll become visible in that city of Rome that we talked about before. What is today's Rome? And this is where we quoted this prophecy before. It says, Ve'ha'u yoma in pelun gimel shurin ilain me'ai karta de Romi. 3 big structures will collapse. 3 walls, 3 buildings, 3 big buildings will collapse from that city of Rome that day. Ve'eichala ravrava in pol, and a great palace will fall. Ve'shalita dehahi karta yamut. And the ruler of that city, the ruler of the Rome, will fall. So that ties into the other Talmud prophecy about the fall of the third Rome. Kidein itpashet ha'u kochava, and then that star will spread all over the world. Va'u zimna itarun kravin tkifin be'alma, and at that time there will be great wars happening all over the world. Lechol daled sitrin, all over the world. Okay. And there will be no faith among the people. So that's what it's saying. On a Friday, the 25th of Elul, the star will appear. It's going to last for 70 days. On the day that it appears, 3 big buildings from Rome will fall, a palace will fall, the ruler of that city will die. And then it says that, just reading ahead a little bit, when the star will then disappear, it's going to last for 70 days. After it's gone, Izdaza Ara Kadisha, the Holy Land will shake, Memhe Milin, 45 miles, and apparently there's going to be an earthquake in the Holy Land, and that will reveal an underground cave, and from that cave, a fire from under where the temple was, around the place of the Beit Mikdash, there will be a cave will be revealed, min tachot ara, from under the ground, ume'ai me'arta ipuk eisha takifa, and a great fire will emerge from that cave, le'okda alma, to consume the world. That's what it says. Ume'ai me'arta yazge chad ofa, or chad, according to another version, anafa. So from that underground cave will emerge a great bird or a great branch. Ravrava ilah, this great supernal branch or bird. Deishlot bechol alma, who will rule all over the world. And that's Mashiach. Uchdei nidgale malka Mashiach bechol alma. And that's when Mashiach will come. So that's the timeline that we are given. So on the 25th of Elul, on a Friday, the star will shine. It'll last 70 days. At the end of that, there's going to be some earthquake in Israel, somewhere near the Holy Temple. Mashiach will come at some point after that. And it describes the world that will be, what the world will be like at that time. This is the end of it. Uvnei alma b'shata deitgale. At that time, what will the world be like? We're going to see that Yehon mishtakhin be'akta betar akta, that the people of the world will have suffering after suffering, distress after distress, one thing after another, one pandemic after a war, after another crisis, after another hyperinflation and economy and this and that. And
sounds very exciting.
yeah, one distress after another distress. And this is interesting. Vesanehun de Israel idgabrun. And the haters of Israel will be really strong. There will be many of them. There will be many haters of Israel. That the spirit of Mashiach will then come to subdue them. And he'll destroy the wicked part of Edom. And the land of Seir will be destroyed. And this is the fulfillment of the verse, Ve'Yisrael osechail, that Israel will finally be victorious. Okay, so that's what it's saying. And it ends by talking about Ve'alu Moshim al Har Tzion, that the saviors will finally come and so on. But I find this interesting when we see so much hate, so much just illogical hate all over the world against Israel, against the Jewish people. It really makes no sense. Like the whole world is rooting for the bad guys. It's completely illogical. We all know. And so, but the Zohar is saying that this is what you should expect. When the haters of Israel, Soneon de Israel itgabrun, that the people who hate Israel will be really strong at that time. This is the world right before Mashiach comes. That's the prophecy. Now, what was I talking about? This little revelation that I had. Are you ready? Okay. Just about a year ago, it was the 9th of January, 2023. From the headline news in astronomy and science sources, one of the headlines then was that astronomers discovered a new comet, far, far away, but heading closer to us. And I thought that's really interesting. And they said that it's probably going to reach near us in September of 2024. So at that time, I put it in my list of topics to write about, to talk about, something to watch. And then I kind of forgot about it. Now, with all that's been happening, a few weeks ago, as I started to prepare this shiur, I was thinking to myself, Drach Kochav Mi'Yakov, what happened to that comet? So I went back to that. The comet is called officially C2023/A3, Tzu-Shinshan Atlas. It's named after the two observatories that discovered it, one in Atlas in South Africa and Tzu-Shinshan in China. And so I looked at it, and now they've estimated when is it going to be closest and visible to us here on Earth. And they're saying that on around September 27th of 2024 at night, it should become visible to the naked eye. It's going to be closest to the sun around that time, and it should become visible to the naked eye, which means on the night of September 27th, 2024, if you look up in the sky, if you have a clear sky, it could be. Let's see. So let's see. So if on the 27th of September at night, if you look up in the sky, you might see a comet visible to the naked eye. You'll definitely see it with binoculars, but it might actually, we can't say for sure, but based on the estimates, the trajectory, it should be visible to the naked eye on September 27th. And as soon as I saw that, I said, it has to be. It has to be. In light of what we said in the Zohar. So I pulled out my Jewish calendar. And what day is September 27th? It's a Shtita, it's a Friday. And that night, Kaf Hei Elul, the 25th of Elul. So Friday night on September 27th will be the start of the 25th of Elul. That's meaning, as Shabbat's coming in, the 25th of Elul is coming in. on that day. And so what scientists are telling us now, again, this is only a prediction. It's just interesting that they're saying that on that day, the night of September 27th to the 28th, that comet should become visible in the night sky to the naked eye. And they're estimating that it's going to be visible for at least 2 weeks to the naked eye, and then for several weeks more by binoculars. So when the Zohar is talking about a star that's going to appear and last for 70 days, it's not talking about like an actual sun star, like a gas giant, because that wouldn't disappear after 70 days. It's probably talking about some kind of comet, right? Something that appears in the sky for a short amount of time and then dissipates. So the Zohar is saying that there will be a new star on a Friday night on the 25th of Elul, and it's going to last for 70 days. So this could be it, right? This really could be it. And so let's see. Let's look out for it. Now what I did was I wanted to see what is the deeper significance of that day. I looked at the Parsha that week. The Parsha that week is Nitzavim Vayelech, which we always read right before Rosh Hashanah, because it's going to be Rosh Hashanah the week after. And remember what we said about the first prophecy. At the end of the 7th year, at the start of the 8th year, B'motzei Shvi, that Ben David comes, that the time of Mashiach has come at the end of the 7th year, as the 7th year ends at the start of the 8th year. So this is right at the end. It's the 25th of Elul. This is just a few days before Rosh Hashanah, as this 7th year, hopefully if this is the 7th year, ends. And so the Parsha is Nitzavim Vayelech, which is we read always right before Rosh Hashanah. And it's interesting because right there, in that Parsha, it says, V'chara api bayom ha'u. God is saying, my wrath will be ignited on that day. But that's actually from the Aliyah of that day, of the Friday and Saturday. You know how each day of the week corresponds to one of the 7 Aliyot? Because every Parsha is split into 7 Aliyot. So if you look at the Aliyah for Friday, Saturday, like the Zohar says, the star will appear on a Friday, ve'it kanish, and will be gathered in on a Saturday. So it's almost like the transition from Friday to Saturday, Friday evening to Shabbat, because that's what it's going to be. The 25th of Elul is going to be Shabbat. So it starts on a secular Friday as we transition into Shabbat. So you have to blend the secular calendar and the Jewish calendar here, which is okay, because actually in many places we do use the solar calendar. So sometimes people think that the solar calendar is like impure, unholy, we're not allowed to use it. It's not true. Actually, we do use the solar calendar in many places, even in Halacha, like we did just a couple of weeks ago. When do we switch, when we say the blessing for rain, Barech Aleinu, when do we switch that? We switch on December 5th. Like the halachic date is to switch, if you look in your Siddur, it says to switch on December 5th. It's one of the few things that we do based on the solar secular calendar. And so it's fine. And I wrote an article a few months ago about this, that there is meaning to the solar calendar. The Zohar actually sometimes uses the solar calendar and the solar year. And we see the solar calendar used in many places. Even in the holiest mitzvah of the year was what? In the temple times. What was the greatest mitzvah of the year that was done once a year when there was a temple? The Kohen Gadol and the Ketoret, right? He would bring the incense to the temple, to the Holy of Holies, to the Kodesh Kodeshim once a year. And we read Pitum HaKtoret every morning. What does it say? That they would prepare it, 300 and, right? 68 manim ayuva, 365, what? Keminyan Yamot HaChama. So the holiest mitzvah of the year was prepared based on the solar calendar, based on the 365-day solar calendar. So there's actually, that's a misconception. The solar calendar does have validity. It does have meaning. In fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was known to wish people a Happy New Year on January 1st. People asked him, how could you do that? This doesn't make sense. How could you wish people a New Year? Happy New Year, it's not our calendar. He quoted Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, right, who was famous for trying to find good things about every Jew. And he would say, where there's a pasuk in Tehillim, in chapter 87, it says that God counts Ispor Bichdov Amim. That Hashem Ispor Bichdov Amim. That God counts in the register of peoples, in the way that other nations, that the Amim count. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe quoted that and said, look, you see, God also counts by the secular calendar. Hashem Ispor Bichdov Amim. That God counts in the way that all the Amim count. So because all the Amim collectively agree on this day, we all use this calendar, whether we like it or not. So this is the international standard. So God in heaven also has... so we do have to combine the secular and the Jewish calendar, which is fine. It's not inherently wrong. A friend of mine, Shlomi in Savannah, actually pointed out that if you read last week's portion, the Parsha Miketz, it has, every Parsha has a siman. Usually the siman is how many verses are in the Parsha. At the end of every Parsha, there's a little note that says, this is how many verses are in the Parsha. And for Parashat Miketz, which means Ketz, like the end, which you can interpret as the end of days, there it also says not just the number of verses, but strangely, it's the only Parsha that also says the number of words. And the number of words there is 2025, which is really interesting as well. So who knows? In Parashat Miketz, it's the only Parsha that also says this is how many words there are. Usually it just says verses. Here it also says how many words there are. And Davka in Parashat Miketz, which means from the end, there's 2,025 words. Could that be another sign? I don't know. Let's see. But in Parashat Nitzavim Va'elech, on the 6th and 7th day, which corresponds to the 25th of Elul, the Friday, Saturday, it says, V'chara api bo bayom ha'u, that God is saying, my wrath will be ignited on that day. And this is where it actually says, the famous verse that we've all heard, V'anochi haster astir panai bayom ha'u, that I will hide my face from them. God says, I will hide my face from them on that day. And then I will punish them for al kol hara'a asher asa, for all the wicked things that the peoples did. So that's from the Parsha of that day, the Aliyah of that day. And I even looked at the Daf Yomi of that day. The Daf Yomi of that day, Bava Batra, page 94, 95 on Friday, Saturday. And that's also something really interesting here as well. On Bava Batra, page 94, it talks about an interesting halachic case, which I'm not going to get into, but it's a very strange case where if two people give money to a third person to hold for them, just to watch my money. And one person gave $100 and the other person gave $200, but then they both claim, when they come back, they say, hey, give me back my $200. They both claim that I gave you $200. But one of them gave 200 and one of them gave 100. But what's interesting there is that the Talmud doesn't give a solution. And instead, what does it say? And it says this twice. It's really quoting from Bava Metzia, and it's saying, we're going to leave it, Yehei munach ad she'yavo Eliyahu. Leave it until Eliyahu comes. What is that? It's like a teku, yeah. It doesn't say teku here. It just says, Yeh munach ad she'yavo Eliyahu. What does that have to do with anything? How does that help me? If I have a dispute, if I have an halachic dispute, and this is a real case, what am I supposed to do? The Talmud says, just wait till Eliyahu comes. Okay, thanks. That was 1,500 years ago. What have people done in the last 1,500 years since the Talmud wrote this, if a case like this came up? And it actually says this twice. It says, it's an interesting discussion, but it says twice there, Yehei munach ad she'yavo Eliyahu, which the Talmud does in other places too, where it says, Eliyahu will come in and solve the issue. Wait till Eliyahu comes. So if that's any indication, that also helps that even the Daf Yomi is talking about Eliyahu coming, and it mentions it not once, but twice on that page. And the last thing is, if we look back at that Zohar prophecy, it says that when the star will appear, 3 structures from the city of Rome will fall, and the leader of that city will die. If you're going to go with the approach that we suggested a couple of years ago, that the third Rome is Moscow, and then the leader of that city will die. I mean, there's rumors always that Putin is dying. He's died many times already, according to alternative media sources. But you can imagine what would happen. I mean, he is supposedly in frail health. Nobody knows. But imagine what would happen if he did die. That would have serious reverberations and would cause, who knows what will happen in Russia? What's going to happen with the war? Or if people say that the third Rome, a lot of people like to say that the third Rome is referring to the United States as being the most powerful, the Roman Empire, so to speak, of today. That's also, Biden is pretty much on his last legs anyways. He could drop dead any moment. He could be dead by the time we finish this class tonight. So he's barely... So I know we all hope that he'll make it through 2024, because God forbid nobody wants Kamala Harris as the president, even if it'll be just for a few months. But so I'm always hoping, God, just keep him in there until January 2025, so that we don't have a Kamala Harris presidency. Anyway, yeah, either of these leaders are in frail health. and getting old. And if either of them were to die, if that's what this prophecy is talking about, the repercussions would be pretty serious, and it would just add to all the catastrophes that have been happening and that unfortunately are to come as well. But the light at the end of the tunnel is that it's supposed to only last 1 year. And again, as a disclaimer, I'm not a prophet. I'm just reading what the Zohar says, what the Talmud says, and there's various ways to interpret it. And the astronomers think that this is when the star will appear. Could it be this star? I think it's promising. Nobody knows for sure. We'll see in, 9 months or so? So you have 9 months to prepare. And now's the time to get ready for Geulah. Hopefully it will be. If not, I'll just have to take this video down from YouTube and pretend it never happened. But there is always a danger, right, of making predictions. But this is only one interpretation. So you can make of it what you wish. I think it's compelling. And I think we should all hope and pray that this really is it. Because how much longer can we wait? Like, enough is enough. Like, this is it. We should all hope that this is it. Let's just suffer through the next 9, 10, 11, 12 months. And let's be that generation that goes through the suffering, but then brings about a better world. So hopefully we can all experience it and see it, and maybe our prayers and our mitzvot and our study and all the good that we do will make a difference. So let's do that. Let's increase whatever we do. Let's do more of it in the next year or so, and hopefully we'll see good things. So we'll end with that. Thank you.